Hello, everybody. This short recording is going to be used to explain the concepts of intra and intertemporal economies of scope. These relate to the resource synergies, particularly for those non-scale free resources that need to be allocated. And what we're thinking about here is the difference between contemporaneous sharing of resources, which are what we see with the 4C synergies. So a resource being shared from one business unit to another in order to create more value. And we're contrasting that with the reallocation of resources over time from one business to another business. Most resource synergies, or all of the resource synergies that we cover in the 4C synergy framework, are intra-temporal economies of scope. So usually when we talk about economies of scope, we are talking about intra-temporal economies. One example of that is pulling from an example of a former candy company that started manufacturing nicotine lozenges to help people stop smoking. So an intratemporal economy of scope would exist if the cost of making candy and nicotine lozenges in the same company is less than the cost of making candy in one company and making nicotine lozenges in another company. So that would probably be an example of a consolidation synergy. So they have some underutilized manufacturing capacity, equipment that can melt down sugar and other substances and then mold it into the shape of some candy or lozenge or something like that. So that's a very traditional economy of scope and an example of a consolidation resource synergy. However, economies of scope can also be intertemporal, and that would happen using the same example if it was cheaper for a company that used to make candy to now make these nicotine lozenges than it would be for one company at one point to have made candy and then a brand new company to start from scratch making these nicotine lozenges. So essentially, that's saying uh, this existing candy company um, stops making candy. They take all of their existing knowledge about how to work with these chemicals and melting down sugar and other things and using these machines to mold the lozenge and package it. They're taking all of that existing equipment and all of that existing knowledge and using it for a new purpose. And that new purpose is making these nicotine lozenges. So this is an intertemporal economy. They're not making both products at the same time, but they're reallocating the resources that they used to use for one to another new use. And that's actually what happened in the example I'm referring to. They were not continuing to make both products, but instead they stopped making candy and entered into this new, more profitable industry. So these are just definitions of these economies. Um, the argument is that if these intertemporal economies do exist, then that creates an advantage for a diversifying entrant over a de novo entrant. All that really means is if this candy company wants to compete against a drug company and it already has all of this equipment and all of this expertise, it's cheaper and easier for them to break into this new industry than it would be for some completely different company without existing resources to learn everything and acquire all the equipment in order to enter this same industry. But an important thing to take into mind and into account when you're thinking about intertemporal economies is that there are adjustment costs. And that's part of why these synergies or these intertemporal economies don't always exist. This was an example where the company was very effective in reallocating those resources from one purpose to another. But you can maybe imagine that if there were regulations on the types of equipment that could be used, or if the value of the candy making knowledge was such a small part of the knowledge required to make these nicotine lozenges that the cost to get up to speed in this new industry and get rid of the old equipment and buy new equipment and all these things would not make it advantageous. In that case, some other company, perhaps even starting from scratch, might be better off coming up with this new business and developing that knowledge and buying the right equipment at the beginning, as opposed to trying to repurpose something that was intended for something else. Um, so one of the tasks involved in redeploying these resources and trying to create intertemporal economies is minimizing adjustment costs. One thing that can do that is the relatedness based on resource needs between these diversifications. Relatedness increases resource relevance, both intra and intertemporally. So in this example of the candy company and the nicotine lozenge product, if they were to create both of those at the same time, the fact that there's such a high overlap in the resource requirements between them means that they could create those consolidation synergies and have both product lines and create value by having both of them at the same time. But that same relatedness also makes it easier to reallocate those resources from one to the other over time. So it could be that they gradually enter into the new industry and share those resources contemporaneously for a while and create those 4C synergies for a while, and then completely shift into only the new business and get rid of what they used to be doing. So you could have over time a period where there's the 4C resource synergies, but then also the reallocation of resources. And even with a partial reallocation, say at one point, candy is 90% of their business, and that at another point, the nicotine lozenges are 90% of the business, and now candy is only 10%. That also is an intertemporal economy, while the resources are also being shared at any given time. A few things that can also help to reduce this adjustment cost or one big thing is modularity. Modularity exists when you have high interdependence within modules and low interdependence between modules. It's essentially what that would mean, again, using this example, is if you have a candy business and a nicotine lozenge business, if you are sharing just a few things between them, but everything else is separate and independent, it's a lot easier for you to make changes. Um, so you could sell off that candy business. For example, if the brand is more valuable to some candy company and you want to get out of that, if you're limiting the interdependency between these businesses, it makes it easier to do that. You can sell off one business without messing things up for the other business. Modularity is essentially choosing to limit intratemporal economies of scope or decreased intratemporal economies. So you're having less joint operation, fewer 4C synergies. But the advantage of that is you increase flexibility for these intertemporal economies. Uh, so if you're this company and you're trying to decide uh, to break into this new business, if you suspect that the future of the company really rests on these nicotine lozenges and that you'll probably exit the candy business, instead of trying to maximize the 4C synergies and create as many synergies between them as possible, you'll limit the synergies only to those that are absolutely necessary and try to keep the businesses as separate as possible so that if you do choose to exit the candy business, that's easy to do. This is just another example of modularity, obviously not related to corporate strategy, but it might help visualize this for those that need some visual examples. The system on the left, the PC or desktop computer, is a highly modular system. Each of these parts has high complexity. You can tell this is kind of an old example because it has an old traditional hard drive and a DVD burner and a very, very simple video card. But each of these components is relatively complex. They're made by different companies that have a high level of expertise in each of those, but there's a completely standard interface that connects all of these, and that creates modularity, and it makes it easy to switch out different parts or use different parts in various parts of the system, and you can change them out over time and upgrade certain components and things like that. And the rest of the system will continue to work the same. So you have a lot of complexity within each part and interdependence within the part, but low complexity and interdependence between the parts. The example on the right is a breakdown of a laptop computer. These are much less modular. They're tightly integrated, and there's a lot of complexity and interdependence between the parts. Often parts are chosen and cases are custom made in order to fit very tightly together and make the best possible use of every bit of space within the system. But that means that it's much harder to make changes. Some laptops are basically sealed and it's almost impossible to change any part of it. Um, and for those that do have some replaceable parts, maybe they'll make it easy to upgrade the RAM or something like that. But it can be very difficult to replace the rest of it. Um, so with that high modularity, you get a lot of interdependence. That does allow you to make a very small and portable device that performs very well, given the space constraints. So you are getting value with that interdependence, but it greatly reduces the flexibility. So that's an example of a low modularity or tightly integrated system. At the corporate level, we can think about modularity as a common example of that would be some sort of conglomerate, where you might have GE, which has a lot of very high tech, very sophisticated businesses, like GE Healthcare, Vernova, which is green energy solutions, um, and aerospace with engines and all kinds of advanced technology there. Each of these is a very complex business that has a lot of interdependent and moving parts within them, but there's very little interdependence between the businesses, and that allows them to make big changes over time. They can sell off entire divisions and create new divisions, and the rest of the business, all these other versions of GE are completely unaffected. I believe in this example, the company was actually broken up into three different companies with these units. So modularity allows that flexibility. Um, in contrast, a low modularity or more integrated system might be what you see with the Apple ecosystem, where there's a lot of complexity and interdependence between the business units. So the Apple Watch is designed to function with the iPhone. And in fact, you cannot really use the Apple Watch without an iPhone. A lot of the functionality requires that connection. Similarly, you can share apps and files across the iPhone and an iPad and a desktop. You can also purchase videos on a computer and watch them on an Apple TV device. So this is a very tightly integrated system. It would be very hard for a lot of these to be sold off and to function as well as an independent business, because part of the value proposition is how well integrated these products are and how well they work together. So if you have a lot of Apple products, part of the value isn't just in how well each of those devices works, but how well they work together. So you are sacrificing flexibility with this low modularity and tightly integrated system, but you create a lot of synergies and realize a lot of value with this sharing of resources between the products. So that's all. Thank you for listening to this. If you have any questions, you can definitely post them on Canvas, and maybe others will provide examples, or I can take a look and answer any questions you have. But I hope that this was helpful. Thank you.